I find it very strange to be in this situation, somewhat uncomfortable, because before I start, our school isn't something that I set up, it's something that we set up. And when I say we, I talk about my colleagues, I talk about the leadership, my colleagues across the faculty and across the college, my colleagues in the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland, in the HSE, and it goes wider and wider. And of course our students, some of whom are here and who are building that reality with us at the moment. So I'm more comfortable saying that this is the day, I'm happy to be here, but it's a day for all of us. And it's a day when we celebrate what we've achieved. I chose the title of the unbearable, or the bearable lightness of being present, and many people will know where that comes from. Of course, it comes from Kundera's book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. That's just so you don't think I'm plagiarizing. But this has been the journey for me over the last number of weeks. It's been a journey of reflection, because I'm looking back at 41 years since I stepped into a school of nursing in an apprenticeship program to start training to be a nurse. And that's a long time in one's life. And so as I look at this period here, I'm reflecting on lots of stuff. So Maynooth University is a really interesting place to head towards the end of my career. And I know some of my colleagues hate me talking about that. Because I came from a reality of a love of science, a love of radios, telescopes, astronomy, making space models, fixing things. My brothers used to call me Finn'll Fix It, because I'd take anything apart, including televisions, and somehow fix it. I never knew how. I couldn't replicate it again afterwards. That's something wrong with learning there. And then I had a choice, because I ended up going into the area of religion, first of all, in 1982, to be a Roman Catholic priest. I met somebody and left that. And then I came into science, because science is what I always wanted to do. And I came here to do science in 1984. And I was a pioneer. Those who are my age will know what a pioneer is. I hadn't taken the drink for religious reasons. And I didn't tell you this, President, when I met you first. So on my 21st birthday in 1985, some of my science friends, classmates, brought me to the Roost, and I had my first pint of Guinness. And everything went downhill from there. And I spent most of the rest of that year in the haze and dropped out. So to come back here, having gone in a totally different direction, is quite interesting, because everything has come full circle. And not only that, and our students will know, they started on the day, 40 years to the day after I started nursing. So this Maynooth there's been many partings along the way, but many meetings, and this is a happy space for meetings. And I have a friend here, Brian, who's a Tolkien fan, as is Colin, who will recognize some of the words in this. And while we talk about this being inaugural, for me, there's an exaugural aspect of it as well, because I'm in that transition period in my life where I'm thinking about retirement. Officially, I can retire in 2029 when I reach 65. Will I? Won't I? I'll keep you guessing on that. But I am quite ready for another journey. When that journey is, I'm not sure, because this journey is so good. And I said it to the president outside and also to the registrar. This is the happiest period of my career. And being in Maynooth is a central part of that, and being with the people in my school, but also in the faculty, because I'm having conversations about things which I love, science, and also with people in other faculties about humanities. So Maynooth has brought together the science and, I suppose, humanities that are central to nursing. So by way of prologue, nursing is something which stretches across art and science, humanities and sciences. We found ourselves typically working in spaces which are pre-configured as biomedical spaces, very science-oriented spaces. But we've also found ourselves typically in universities located within very science-oriented faculties. And yes, I'm in one here, but it's not a bioscience faculty in the same way as I would have been in before. And so sometimes the art of nursing, the humanities of nursing, doesn't have the opportunity to flourish or to be valued maybe by ourselves in the same way as we should be valuing it, because it's a core, central part of what we do. And I can say as a nurse, and you'll get nurses who like me who'll say this, that you can't separate the core of who I am from the nurse of who I am. So humanities and science, and when we look at research in those areas, we're thinking about things like curiosity, phenomena, observation, theory generation. I'm not going to talk to you about research, per se. So if I was to come here, I could talk to you, here's my findings on this and that. I'm going to talk to you about the very first part, curiosity. Thinking, reflecting, and wondering, is there something going on there that we need to be aware of before we risk losing it again? Many of the elements of nursing remain unknown. I don't usually quote Nightingale. She's not my role model. I don't see myself as a Victorian woman. But I will accept that many of the elements of nursing remain unknown. We still have so much to find. And I was speaking to somebody this morning and explaining, and it sort of harmonized with Kundera's book, because Kundera wrote about a period which they called the Czech Spring. Nursing in Ireland has been in its own spring. Between around the end of the last century, sounds a long time ago, but since around 2000 up till now, and maybe a little bit before that in some other countries, where we've flourished and moved away from task-oriented work to more theory generation, to more thinking about what are the values, what is the essence of who we are and what we do. And we are at risk, I think, of moving back into a task-oriented space. And so my final slides will be calling a little bit of a warning in relation to that, because we don't want to lose what we're finding and accepting is the core of what we are and what we do. So for those who are expecting some research, and Ronan, I told you there will be a graph, I thought this is the best way I can represent in that way what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to be looking at, on the y-axis, lightness of becoming and being, and the x-axis, the ability to bear weight or burden. Now, it means absolutely nothing. I'm just making this up here now. But the journey is going from being to becoming nurse, not becoming a nurse, because many people become a nurse, becoming nurse to the core of who you are. Being present in nursing, I think that's central to being nurse. And what does that actually mean? And if there's something in there, before we potentially lose it, we need to start investigating it, writing about it, talking about it, owning it, accepting it, celebrating it, and making sure that it's something which remains core to what we do. So I'm interested, and I've always been interested in the interpersonal space. I've worked, as you'll see in a couple of slides' time, I've worked in disability services on and off over many years. I've worked in general hospitals, particularly in spinal cord injury nursing. I've worked in refugee situations as well. And I've noticed that there's a tendency to create space between who we are and who the other person is. And whether that's in some ways, the professionalization of our role, which creates layers and layers, which in my past, we would have been told you don't become emotionally attached to the patients. I think, I won't use any crude words in front of a camera, I think that's a load of rubbish. And I think we've moved well beyond that. Because an interpersonal space is one where two persons, two humans come together. And in that space, humanity and dialogue and reality happens. And burden happens as well. And it's a frightening space sometimes. So I'm interested in that. So when some of you will have seen the RTE documentary which investigated Iris-Attracta. Inside Bungalow 3, I think it was called. I was consultant to that. And what we saw in there was that space getting so wide that people were objectified. To the point that the way they were being treated meant they were no longer seen as human beings. They could be hit. They could be force-fed. They could be dragged along the ground and ignored. But isn't that what we see in situations of refugees, in many situations around the world? And not many other people who experience the negative consequences put on them because of their diversity. So, a brief history of me over time. I'm sorry, I keep feeling that my gown is going to fall down or something. I should have done what Jenny did when she was doing hers before and taken it off. So I've told you I was in religious life. That has informed me. And whilst I mightn't share the beliefs that of those who I was in religious life with at this point, they have informed me and they've changed me. Astronomy and science is something which is core to who I am as well. Though I don't get any time to do that stuff anymore. I have asked John Keating to let me talk to him about ham radios, and I think David in Hamilton is into ham radios as well, so I've got one at home, I just need to learn how to turn it on again. But then I left religious life because I found myself being formed into somebody who would be distanced from others, I felt. And I said, I'm not going to allow myself to be formed. And I went into nursing, and look at me there. I ended up in the uniform, very strongly formed, with other people putting on me their views of who I am and who I should be, and me internalizing the views of who I believed I was. And it took me 20 years to free myself from that, to the degree where I could step over being a nurse to becoming nurse. And a lot of that stuff is about when we enter into that interpersonal, not the space, but into the interpersonal situation, we can only get into the space and come closer if we recognize all those things which wrap around us and which we wrap around the people whom we're going to be engaging with. And by recognizing them, we need to learn how to peel them off. And I'll have a term for that later on. This is probably the last of the Tolkien sort of references in this, but I just wanted people to feel comfortable if they are like Tolkien. I'm going to ruin the story for those who haven't read The Lord of the Rings or watched the movies. This is Gandalf. He was a wizard. He's a wizard, Harry. But he was Gandalf the Grey until he fell into the abyss fighting the Balrog. And you don't need to know what a Balrog is. I can tell. No, I won't. Brian, no, you're not going to either. But he died. But when he came back in the second book, sorry, I should have given the spoiler alert there, he talked about straying out of thought and time and wandering so far. And that line has stayed with me for maybe 10, 12 years. The idea of liminality. Distance can lead to the creation of liminality and liminal spaces for other people. And unless we're committed to breaking down the barriers to those liminal spaces and bringing people into the shared space, I think other bad things can happen. Things such as we saw in Iris-Attracta on the top there. Things such as I saw in Lesbos in the middle picture there when I was there on one visit. Things such as we are seeing happening in the region, the Gulf region. I'm not going to call it the Middle East because that's a term which has been given by other parts of the world. But so many other regions of the world, there are people suffering in liminal spaces. And in liminal spaces, we don't have to think about them. And that's what happened in intellectual disability services. We didn't need to think about them because they're there. We go about our lives. But when we think about them, or when we're linked to people of diversity, we start to ask questions and say, this can't go on. This can't continue. So there's something in there which is about disengagement and the need for being and for engagement. And when I'm speaking about, I can only speak from the position of nursing. But I suspect this will ring bells to say, yeah, that's the same in psychology. That's the same in clinical speech and language. That's the same in psychology. I've spoken to Marianne there as well. It's the same in applied social studies and social work. It's the same in so many human service professions. Human service professions. The key word there, of course, is human. So lightness, weight, and time. That's strange. Tim, I don't know who Tim is, but we'll take it that he's there somewhere. Lightness and weight. I'm interested in that because I think there's something in there about how we grow as nurses. I love what Milan Kundera wrote about the heavier the burden, the closer our lives come to the earth, the more real and truthful they become. The heavier the experience of the human state, when you encounter that, it seems really heavy. It's something that, oh my God, I can't deal with that. Being with somebody as they die, of course, that's taking a very, taking the most stark. Being with somebody who's just been told that they've lost neurological function. What would I do there? And a lot of nurses in their careers, in their earliest stage of their careers, when they encounter that, they don't know what they're going to do. And sometimes, as we'll see, busyness and doing other stuff can keep us away from having to face into this. But yes, the burden is heavy. But when we carry it together, the burden is lighter. And when we engage interpersonally with people in that space, I think we experience a lightness as well. Conversely, the absolute absence of burden causes man to be lighter than air, to soar into heights, take leave of the earth and his earthly being, and become only half real. His movements as free as they are insignificant. And one of my former colleagues here, a good friend, who is a Proust, not fan, but expert, will recognize here that you aren't in time when you're fleeting from one place to the other. And you can't be being when you're fleeting from one place to the other. So what do we choose, weight or lightness? Kundera asks. Well, going back to the quote, I think I have to say, well, if I'm going to be a nurse, if I'm going to be nurse, I must choose weight. And in weight, I will find lightness. So, does this make things bearable? Yes. Because there's so much that you contribute and you gain through those moments. And again, as I'll say later, don't worry, this will be finished at some stage. Again, as I say later, this has the capacity to be transformative. Not just transformative for the person, patient, service recipient, but transformative for all of us. So that being in time concept, towards the end of the volumes, I'm still, Colin, only on book 4, but in volume 6, Finding Time Again, he reflects on how his journey through. Bruce reflects on this journey through time to retrieve what was lost. Something that had taken place had not taken place for me. This is at the bell, when the bell is ringing in the local church, and he didn't hear the last one, but he heard the one before, and that wasn't meant for me. But so much happens in the human encounter in clinical spaces that hasn't taken place for us or for the patient, and should have taken place. And we can't retrieve that. We can't recover the lost time from nursing encounters, I believe. We can write about it and reflect on it, but that encounter is gone. So we must be in time. So becoming nurse, and this is Co-Pilot's attempt to create a nurse. Originally, I think she was wearing scrubs, and she also had a stethoscope, and it was very Americanized. So I said, get rid of the stethoscope, make a uniform, get a picture of our uniform, and put the Maynooth logo on. It couldn't make the Maynooth logo any smaller, but that's great. Maybe we need to modify our uniforms. So becoming nurse, and our wonderful first cohort of nursing students in Maynooth University are on that journey to becoming nurse. And my daughter, Alicia, has become nurse. My wife, Sheerin, became nurse a long time ago. And my daughter, Quillen, is becoming physiotherapist. So that thing between becoming a nurse and nurse is something I'll play around with a little bit here. When we look at where people who come into nursing typically come from, it's not surprising that many have experienced receiving care. And maybe they received care at the hands of a nurse who they said, I want to be like him or her or them. Maybe it's somebody who really likes to help other people, and maybe it's been giving care to a family member. These are the stories I've heard from our own students, but I've heard them from students before as well. Or maybe it's parents who are expert carers, but want to extend that caring to others. And maybe it's coming from adversity. And quite a lot of people come in who have had trauma in their lives, who've had distress in their lives, who've had loss in their lives, who've had diversity which has caused challenges in their lives. Not the diversity necessarily, but the response to it. For me, I've sort of gone across the spectrum a little bit here, because I grew up in a family where alcoholism was a really difficult thing, with a lot of trauma and beatings and stuff, which I don't remember a lot of, but my brothers tell me about. So that's a difficult space to come from, and to try and find a place to belong. And maybe that accounts for me going from religious life to this, to this, to this. And why I went into nursing, I don't know, but maybe I found that nursing was a place I belonged. It was unbearable. I know now it was unbearable, because now I can reflect on the unbearable heaviness of being a child in an alcoholic family. In my teenage years, my Tourette's, which you won't see much of because I control it now, and unlike the film, I do not swear. Well, I do, but I control when I'm going to. And sometimes, though, in front of the registrar yesterday, anyway. So I was ticking so much that I couldn't hold a conversation. And my well-being and my sense of self was so poor. And Claire, who's a friend of mine from many years, will remember how things were. And that feeling of difference and abnormality, something is wrong with you. My parents said it when I didn't go in for my exams here, President, for the biology exam. They said, there's something wrong with you and you need to see a psychiatrist. And luckily I did. And that's okay. We need support at times. So as an early adult, I felt nothing but failure. In the face of having a successful brother and so on, I was the failure. I was the one who would never achieve. This is quite phenomenal for me, but unfortunately my parents aren't here to see this. As I became an adult, and relationship with Sheerin, and also then within the comfort of and safety of my profession and family of nursing, I found the belonging made things more bearable. lighter, easier to carry. And in middle age, well, am I middle age? I don't know. I think I'm older, but I now have a sense of security and everything is bearable. And I can look back at these things and I can go into very difficult situations and it is bearable. But I'm going in there knowing that I will be fully immersed in the realities of those situations. There are a number of different journeys sort of to becoming a nurse and becoming nurse, which we teach to our students, and which underpins some of the assessment processes that we have. One is Benner's work from novice to expert, which is based on the Dreyfus and Dreyfus's work in the 70s, I think, which is around people who are flying planes and intuition and all of that. Another one is how the different types of knowledge that we access and use. And Carper wrote on that, the fundamental patterns of knowing. Or else we can just look at the career progression. You become a nurse, you become a senior staff nurse, you do this, you do this, you do this. And as we go through those, I'm not sure that these necessarily lead to the becoming nurse. I think we aim for our students to be competent on graduation. But of course, we all move back and forth between being novice, advanced beginners, depending on the situations we find ourselves in. And it takes time to become more proficient or expert. And as an expert nurse, they say that a nurse can read the room. And it is a funny thing to watch. And we all, those of us in nursing, all know the nurse in the older person situation who walks in at night time and says, "Keep an eye on Mrs. Smith. I think she's going to go off tonight." And Mrs. Smith will go off tonight. When I say go off, she's probably going to die. Sorry, Mrs. Smith. As a nurse in intellectual disabilities, where behaviour was an issue, for various reasons, often because the people had the experience of living lives which were very stressful, I would have found myself going into a room and saying, "Keep an eye on John there. I think John's going to have a seizure today. John would have had epilepsy. Or Michael may be going to have a behavioural outburst today," if that's the word I can use. Marianne, I don't know if that's the right word. I'm old school. So there's an intuitive knowledge here. And you'd asked me, how did you know that? I haven't got a clue how I knew it. Somehow I was able to read the signs, the room. There's something in there which is about patterns. And we could go into memory, and the students won't want this because I talked to them about decision-making the other day and working memories and all, and we won't do that. We draw on lots of different types of knowing as well. And we often start based on very empirical sort of knowing, things that we can measure. But over time, I think our sources of knowing become different and expand. And maybe that accounts for the intuitive part of it. And this stages of becoming a nurse. If you look at the career, I mean, do we become nurse as opposed to a nurse just through moving through seniority levels? I'm not sure that we do. I think it's easy enough to move through positions without actually getting into that deep space. So people ask me these questions a lot of the time. When did you become a nurse? And I say, well, I became a nurse in 1988. But if you want to know when I became nurse, probably around 2006. Don't ask me what I was doing in between, but I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Why did you become a nurse? I don't know. I drifted in because I dropped out of so many things, and they told me if I was getting the dole, the social welfare, I had to do work experience, and they sent me to an intellectual disability service. That's how I went into nursing. And then they say, "Why did you leave nursing?" And I said, "What? I never left nursing." Because I'm on the career path of nursing, which is the educational, academic career path of nursing, and the research path of nursing, and the social activity, social action part of nursing, and so many other parts of nursing. So I never left nursing. And then when did you become a nurse? And let's say about 2006. So I hope, Carolyn, from a registration point of view, I was nursing and doing good stuff before 2006. So I'm suggesting that there is another model that may explain what I'm reflecting on and what I've seen and noticed. Or maybe I'm the only person who saw this and I'm deluded. I think we go through an early stage in our career of caring for, which is quite paternalistic or maternalistic, whatever the word is now. It's the doing for others, and we're bringing our expertise and our skills, and we build that as we go. And that can actually be, that can become a little bit toxic over time, because we can become the experts and see the others as disempowered recipients of what we're going to give them. And that is at play a lot in professional fields. I think when we start encountering humans, human encounter, and if we have to spend, and I say have to, we're told spend a bit of time with such and such a person, she's in a lot of pain. It's really difficult to sit with somebody who's in pain when you can't do anything. But what you can do is be there. And sometimes there's a tendency, maybe amongst people, to want to get away from that, or to avoid certain things. I've never been part of the crash team in a cardiac arrest, because I know I would be useless in that situation. So I always gravitated around the edge to get the stuff and do the things. But I was always really frightened about that situation. I know before I came into nursing, I'd never seen anyone die. And the first person who died in my hands, very traumatically, bled out through their nose and their mouth as I held them. That was my first experience, and that's very heavy for a young nurse. But I've also nursed many people who drifted happily because I couldn't understand it. I do now. They were people who had got to a stage where they said, I'm ready. And I get that. My head's getting around that type of thing now as I get older. I'm ready. And to be with somebody and to be privileged to be in that space, to support, to be, and to stay. And then to give the respect to the body that's left behind. These are core human things. These are things which bring us together as people. If we don't do them, and if nurses don't do these things, then I actually fear for where we go from there. So that human encounter, I think, is key, because if we find, and maybe resilience, and Nikki, her work is in resilience and workforces, I think that's something we need to do, and we need to do well here in Maynooth. Because we need to give our students the skills to be there, and to stay there, and to cope, and to support. Because then we can go into a thing of interpersonal honing, I think. Honing our skills, but honing our ability to be, with the hope of achieving dialogic engagement. And I think that's where knowing and compassion, which when we set up the school, and Adeline and Miles said to me, we must be very clear that we are about compassionate care. And presence is central to that. So caring for is easy. Anyone can do that. A robot can do that. Yeah? It's just learning some psychomotor stuff. Obviously, there's decisions around it, but the doing of that thing there, of cleaning a wound, is relatively straightforward. If we go into what dressing we're going to use, that needs knowledge. And it needs algorithms and all of those things. But we came from a profession. One of my colleagues from many years ago, who unfortunately has been quite ill, Trace Meehan from University College Dublin, a leader, an utmost leader in nursing in Ireland, and an unsung leader and hero, I think. We've been fortunate enough we've been fortunate, she has been unfortunate, to receive her books, some of which are in the library, one of the biggest collections of nursing theory books I've ever seen. And it's in our library, available to all. But I have a group of other books about the history of nursing. Nightingale, the Sisters of Charity, System, all of, and there's one book which is from 1900 and another from 1930 about nursing. And I looked at it and I thought, God, that looks familiar. And I got my equivalent book from 1985, and it was the same stuff. And it's almost like there was a period which was just about task. Do the job, don't ask questions, don't need to know too much, just do the job. Once you can do the job, you're all right. And then we entered into what I call our nursing spring, where we've had the opportunity to understand why we do the job and how can we do the job better. And how do we explore, as our nursing midwifery boards having their code of professional conduct and scope of, so the scope, God, the school's going to close after this. But the scope of practice, that idea that we can push the edges, because we don't work in clearly definable spaces always and clearly definable realities, but we must have the skills, the knowledge, the competence, and the policies to support what we do. This is where many of us of my vintage learned, task-oriented, doing stuff and appearing busy. And if you weren't appearing busy, you weren't doing anything. I was complained to the director of nursing in the Meath Hospital because I was brought in and she said, Nurse Sheerin, I have a complaint about you from Sister. I said, yes, matron. She said, you spend too much time with the patients. And I laughed. I said, and the problem is what? And she said, well, the Sister said that you're spending too much time and other people are having to do tasks. I said, other people are doing tasks in an inefficient way and keeping busy. And there's loads of time to spend with the patient if we do our tasks in the way that they need to be done. I don't try to keep busy. And she said, yes, I get what you're saying. And I linked it to our clinical assessment. And she said, yes, I get that. And a week later, I was transferred to the change management team for Tala Hospital. But the engagement in those situations is often the engagement around tasks, but the task is the main thing. And it's often superficial, what I'd call standard script conversation. How are you? I'm well. Nice day. Yes. And this just goes on. And I think it's light. It's like you could stay in that reality. You could still pay you the same amount of money. But I think you reach at some point in your career a divergence. I think the direction of travel is important in respect of what comes next. When you start encountering the reality for women of labour, when you start encountering the reality for babies of birth as well, and of women obviously as well. When you start encountering pain, loss of function, sadness, relief, joy, the feeling of that some people have of being devalued, of being different, when you experience dying and death, those things become heavy and are much more challenging from an engagement point of view, and they demand more. And so we need to hone our skills, our interpersonal skills in there, deciding, not just because of the task, deciding to spend more time with the person, seeking to be in time, reflecting in action, becoming reflexive, learning about empathy, compassion, and being in the reality where these things happen or need to happen. And it comes to noticing and listening and attuning. Again, my colleague Colin, his PhD was in attunement. Managing the unbearable heaviness of being present, but also encountering the bearable lightness of being present. To quote Proust, to the nurses seeking not to retrieve lost time, but to find the time and to find the time in the present. And I think this it can become what we might call Paulo Freire would have talked about this, or written about this, a dialogic engagement, where we encounter the person being comfortable in being, where we professionally decloak, and that is a sign of my Star Trek interest. But we do so in solidarity, which is very much at the core of the liberation theology, which I would have dipped into in my earlier time as before I became a nurse and nurse. And that engagement is being in time, and balancing continually the lightness and the heaviness. Being present then, I think the activity and the engagement are all together. They're all one. Because we're actively recognizing being present as being an indivisible part of nursing. We're recognizing that presence occurs in and of itself, as well as being part of the task. And even the task sometimes becomes the vehicle for being present. So the presence, not the task, is the important thing. Being present informs care. It's therapeutic. It's in time, in the moment. It allows us to be solidary with the person, to be open to the possibilities of real change. And if anyone is familiar with the work of Ignacio Ellacuría, the liberation theologian, one of the El Salvadoran Jesuits who was murdered in the 1980s, if correct me, or 80s I think it was. He speaks from a utopianist perspective of achieving a redefinement of history along with those who are oppressed, let's say, that's his words. But I see it as being broader than that. That possibility of real change is real change for all of us and creates for us a lightness of being. And I think it's radical, it's grounded in social justice, and it's a realization of the nurse's origin desire to make life better for another person. That's why we came into it. Some of us lose the way, but that's why we came in. And it's interesting, when you look at key historical figures in nursing, Nightingale is there, but I'm not going to refer to her. Many of them worked well beyond the boundaries of nursing and were socially active. Women's rights, human rights, children's rights, people with disabilities rights. My colleague, who couldn't be here today, from Castlebar, emergency nurse in Castlebar, who's worked with me in Calais, in Dunkirk, in Lesbos, she's regularly taking career leave and going to Syria. She's been to Ukraine. She's been to so many different places, being present with people, and she's on the waiting list now to get into Gaza. She's tried to get in before this as well. So those stages of becoming nurse, there's probably a paper in this somewhere, but I think there's something in here which we need to identify and hold on to if it's seen to be something that's valuable. Because it gives us the possibility to enter into the reality of the other person. This is informed by John Sobrino, another Jesuit theologian. Enter into the reality of the other person, being solitary with them, but knowing and accepting that sometimes the things we did or didn't do have been relevant in the experience of the person, and sometimes negatively relevant. Being faithful to sticking with them through thick and thin, open to the possibility that real change can happen for all of us. And I've written about this several times. So, I'm sorry this is going on probably a bit longer than expected. I hope it's not. Being present is something which others have seen to be core to what we do in nursing. So Therese Meehan's model of nursing, theoretical representation of what nursing is in terms of all the different parts of it, very similar in function to what our American colleagues did in the 60s and 70s, drawing on information and theory from psychology, from science, from also many sociology and other areas. Presence is central to any theory of nursing. Well, let me say, presence is central to any theory of nursing that's worth paying attention to. and we see it in patient engagement in care, self-care. We see it in the focus on tenderness. It's not just tenderness in relation to our patients. When we looked at our school here, we said our values need to be the values which our students bring and others will experience at their hands. But our students should experience those values when they in their interface with us. And we experience it in our interface with each other. So that our tenderness towards each other is something which is core, again, to what we are. And caritas, not charity, but caritas. So my experiences of being present in nursing has been everywhere. As a nurse in clinical situations, working in different teams, in different places, working with health leaders in Malawi, working in social justice campaigns, going into refugee camps, and I actually like, it's a picture I like because it's on the left there on the bottom, because it speaks to us of the reality that what we do is service. And for those of us, I'm not religious anymore, I do recognize that in tasks such as washing people, some things which some nurses will say, that's below us. It's not below me. If I am not there washing somebody's feet, I'm not in the space to interact with them. If I'm not there shaving somebody who doesn't want that beard that's growing over 4 days because nobody else bothered to shave them. If I'm not there doing bowel care, things which nobody really wants to do, heavy things, then I don't see the responses of the person. I don't build that trusting relationship which allows for dialogue to happen and allows for presence and being to occur. And I say the same with my colleagues and the students in the school. I hope that their experience of me is one of being present. I know I work from home quite a bit, but their experience is one of being present. And I hope that the values I'm speaking of are values that you've experienced in the school. I experience them in the interfaces with you guys. So coming towards the end of this, you will give a little sigh of relief. That stuff at the start of caring for human encounter, interpersonal holding, is almost like dialogic engagement becomes the lens or the pathway or the tunnel through which we could achieve presence, where we manage the bearability, if there's such a word, of the realities, where we experience lightness in time and we have the opportunity for things to be transformative. But we need to be careful because as we look through that and look at what's happening, we need to keep an eye on things. Because we've come, as I said, from task orientation to a person-centeredness, to a transformation-focused possibility. But the realities of modern healthcare are such that nurses are working in spaces which are so busy, so tense, so anxiety-driving, that they are at the risk of becoming more focused back on task again. And we also need to watch, and I'm fully supportive of digital transformation and e-health, but we need to be at the forefront there with the people who are developing all of this technology, because we need to tell them what happens when a nurse engages with another person, a patient. So the small example I have is, and I don't think we should go back to the old days. Nowadays, if you want to take somebody's temperature, you put a thing in their ear or to their forehead, and you get a temperature like that. That's great. And then we take it down and we go off to them. Or we put link the person up to the machine to do the blood pressure and press a button, and it does and we take. In the old days, again, I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not suggesting we go back. We put a thermometer under the arm for 3 minutes. And in those 3 minutes, well, some nurses walked away and said they'll come back, but you know, the glass thermometers with mercury can break. You shouldn't be leaving them. They should be reported. But if in those 3 minutes you spent time with, and in that time there's possibility for presence and being. I'm not saying we don't use modern thermometers and things. I'm saying the design of these things needs to be informed in the way that we ensure that the essence of what we are as nurses and who we are as nurses, or as nurse, is retained and not lost. And we need to make sure that there is that space of being is not seen again to be doing nothing. Because if it's seen to be doing nothing, we are going to potentially lose this. And maybe it'll be found again at some time in the future. But I think what we'll see coming in is other people will fill that space. And they become the people who are being with the person. They become the people who are in there in time, chatting over the meal that's been brought by that person, or the person who's cleaning under the bed, who's talking with the person at the same time. There's where the human interface will take place. But that knowledge from that encounter will never get into the patient record. It'll be lost. And that means that we don't have the knowledge for care. And we definitely don't have the knowledge for nursing care then. So we need to be mindful. So it's just, I think it's almost like a wake-up call or an alert for us. 3 stories to end, which speak of engagement and presence. One speaks of caution. This gentleman on the left came into me in the caravan in Calais, in the camp which had 6,000 plus people in it. Didn't speak any English. He asked for my female colleague to leave because he didn't want to expose himself in front of her. So that was fine. And he took his shirt off and he had a vest. I purposely made sketch pictures of this because I don't know how people react to pictures of wounds. But these are wounds. I could see on the vest that there was serous fluid and staining. And so I carefully removed the vest and I saw this. 2 lines of 4 wounds each. All similar size, all burns. Now, any one of us, anyone here can do a basic job of cleaning the wound and putting a bandage on the wound. Yeah? We do it for our kids. We do it for our family members. That's easy. The heavy thing is, what do you do in the situation where you realize that you're in the presence of somebody who's been tortured? What do you do? Now, I don't know because I've no expertise in supporting somebody who's been tortured. But I have to be in that moment at that time. And all we could do, he showed me, which was the indication that somebody had done this to him. Both of us started crying and we held each other. And I can only think that that is a moment of being. For me, it's core to me being nurse. But beyond that, my next job is to bring him to somebody who can bring him on the journey of healing. But of course, in Calais camp, there was nothing like that. But there were some quasi-NGOs who were able to offer support. That's an example, I think, of being present and of being nurse. My daughter will recognize, though I've done it this way so people aren't recognizable in it. When my daughter and one of her classmates came with me to Malawi one year, and we asked people, Alicia, her first area of nursing, like myself, was intellectual disability nursing. We asked, are there any people with intellectual disability here? And people said, what's that? And a lot of people didn't know what we were talking about because infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate meant that probably people with significant disability or impairment were not actually surviving. But we were told about this child who was living in a wooded area where there were some huts. And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia, this child was in a hush sort of space which had a chichenge, isn't that the name of it? The cloth hanging down in front of it. And the people were all wondering, why did they want to talk to this child? Because this child had significant challenges in terms of not being able to mobilize, but also typically not making eye contact. And was also seen to be a burden in some ways, because his mother couldn't go anywhere because she couldn't carry him anymore. And so why would we want to see this child? But my daughter and her friend, using a technique which Colin talked to them about, Colin Griffiths there, of intensive interaction, started doing a mimicry thing, because this child would pick up pieces of grass, flick it, throw it, change hands. And so they started doing mimicry, because sometimes, if I understand it correctly, Colin, the hope is that the other person may notice that they're being followed, that they're actually being followed. And in that awareness, if it's there, they may realize that that they are actually doing something which is leading to something else happening. 2 moments, and this is one of the moments. The little boy lifted his head up, looked into our student, Alicia's friend's eyes, and smiled. And then it was gone. And it happened once or twice again, and I know it happened with you, Alicia, as well. Now, that doesn't seem like a huge thing, but that is huge. And it's huge for that child. And in the presence of community, where this child perhaps was stigmatizing others in some ways, or was seen to be a burden, this child had capability. That's transformative. The last picture, we brought money over to Malawi and we built a well, because we figured it must be terrible for the women to have to carry a bucket of water on. I was going to walk over there, I didn't. I carry a bucket of water on their head, so let's make it easier for them. And people smiled when we built the well. And to quote a very well-known president, it was a very good well. It was a great well, the best well ever. And the water was clear. But the women didn't want a well. We thought they wanted a well, but we didn't ask them. Walking to the well with their buckets of water, our empty buckets, and coming back was the only time they had to talk to each other, during which they talked about the things which were important to them, without having other people around. We just took that away from them. The well's probably not used anymore now anyway. That's a lesson for us in how we progress forward. We need to make sure what we do includes the voices that are core to the people who are going to be doing it or experiencing it. So by way of postscript, I want to say thank you. I'm so grateful to the university here for trusting in me, for believing that I could do a job which I didn't believe I could do, even though I was able to fool the interview panel. I mean, the university, it's been a homecoming. It's been those meetings again. The partings are gone. The meetings are here. It's been a place where I've never experienced the friendliness of colleagues across a university before. Colleagues within my school, within my faculty, within other faculties, within offices. I mean, I never experienced this before. So I'm really grateful to so many people for making my experience so happy. And I don't know why the university leadership team came up second there. Whoops. So I didn't reuse something here. And this has been made possible by the university leadership team. And also, we've been given the chance to put flesh on the bones of a vision. And we're supported in that, which is really important. My colleagues, I mean, I'm working with people who I worked with at various times in the past. It's like a coming together, many more meetings again. It's wonderful. And our students are just the most fabulous group of people I've come across in so long. So, and I wore these Jock Martin boots in this colour because they wanted to know what colour I was going to wear today, ones that they hadn't seen before in class. As I mentioned, colleagues across faculty, university, to our partners, HSC Dublin and Midlands, who are our key partners for our programme. They put trust in us to be able to do something when we didn't know if the resources nationally were going to be there. They trusted us in the same way as the leadership trusted us. And they've just been so wonderful to work with. But also, we've been developing our relationships with Dublin North East as well, and we've fabulous colleagues there who are working with us to make things possible as we develop forward. So we've loads of clinical partners. I can't name them all, because according to Louise, our allocations officer, it's something like 60 different organizations at this stage that we're engaged with for student placements. That is, again, unheard of and phenomenal. And it is a testament to the people who've negotiated that, Louise, Miles, Adeline in particular, in the early stages. The Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland came here to do an assessment, an evaluation of us, and we had wet labs. We didn't have clinical spaces. We had a building plan and a commitment to build. We didn't have staff in place. We didn't have the money in place, all these things, but they believed that we could do it, and we did it, and we're so grateful to you for that, and so wonderful to have colleagues from the Nursing and Midwifery Board here. And friends, past colleagues, all being the people who I've asked to be here are people who've been instrumental. Liz, Colin, Marianne, Claire, and there's so many others. I mean, I've just fallen into the thing of naming people, so I shouldn't say that. God, I've skipped somebody there. Sorry about that. My family. Well, I'll go back to that. Oh, go back up there. Nursing as a profession. I mean, I never dreamed of being a nurse. I couldn't dream of being anything else now. It's just been so wonderful. My family. I mean, Sheerin in particular. I could never have done anything without having somebody to support me along the way, especially when we had 3 young children under the age of 3.5, and I was doing a PhD. I was a great help to her then. But we were working full time, opposite each other, minding our children. And of course, our 4th child, who came along and is the only child in the family. Oh, the only child in the family. But I also want to say Hayley and Amanda and the team, and I mean, God, it's felt like royalty. I'm really grateful to you all for what you've done. I'm blown away. So thank you. That's all I have to say. I've gone way over time, I'm sure, because I should have put a thing. I also meant to show at some stage, these are my medals from nursing, which I will be bequeathing to the school to go into a cabinet somewhere. And I think Miles and Adeline might do the same thing as they go forward. So thank you for listening and for putting up with me. And I hope this isn't too different to what you might have hoped or expected it would be.